Hello and welcome to State of the Union. I'm Stefan Grobe in Brussels. If you love conflicts between the European Union and Hungary, you had a field day this week. The anti-immigrant government in Budapest ignored the deadline to pay a €200 million fine imposed by the European Court of Justice. The judges had found that Hungary committed an unprecedented and exceptionally serious breach of EU law when it put long-standing restrictions on the right to asylum. The dispute dates back to 2020, when the Hungarian authorities were heavily criticized for keeping asylum seekers in so-called transit zones under detention-like conditions. Now the European Commission has put in motion a procedure to collect the €200 million fine.
I think, we have the financial regulation in place. There is no bigger room here. We have to follow the applicable procedures. So we sent a second request in line with the procedure. This gives Hungary 15 calendar days to make the payment.
We'll see what happens in 2 weeks. Yet the shocker of the week was not Hungary's refusal to pay its fine, but the outcome of regional elections in East Germany. For the first time since World War II, a hard-right and fascist party emerged as the strongest force in a state election. A shocker, but not a surprise. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz saw it coming. Even before Election Day, he announced a tougher immigration policy in a vain attempt to stem his Social Democratic Party's bleeding at the polls. Germany has started deporting Afghan nationals with criminal records to their home country. Now, Scholz's colleague south of the border in Austria announced direct deportations to Afghanistan and Syria as well. On that, Vienna would be in close cooperation with Berlin.
Rückführungen nach Afghanistan und Syrien sind kein Tabu mehr, sondern sind mittlerweile eben auch schon ein Bestandteil davon, wie man tatsächlich dieses Thema illegale Migration, Straftäter tatsächlich in den Griff bekommt. Also das heißt, es braucht hier eine Fülle von Maßnahmen und Österreich hat hier einen sehr wesentlichen Beitrag geleistet.
Joining me now is Rafael Loss, Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations in Berlin. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So Olaf Scholz's tougher stance on immigration didn't help him in the election. Is there a risk that his government will abandon other policy positions, like on Ukraine, to please the populist crowd?
There is certainly a risk. I think the federal government, working with the democratic opposition, the Christian Conservative Union, are trying to figure out a way to respond to this electoral victory of the AfD and BSW in Saxony and Thuringe on Sunday. And migration policy seems to be certainly one of those areas that they have identified as needing to work on, but less emphasis on questions like Ukraine, the energy transformation, other somewhat contentious issues.
So the results in East Germany were more of symbolic nature than they were of substance. We're talking about two small states with a combined population of 7% of the German total. Is it still a national bellwether?
It's certainly important to keep things in perspective. You're right to point out that Saxony and Thuringe are not the largest states of the 16 in Germany. But it is the first time that a right-wing extremist party has a 30%, a third of seats in any state parliament or the federal parliament in Germany since 1949, since the founding of the Federal Republic. And so it is, to some extent, a watershed moment that gives the AfD and the BSW some powers, formally and informally, to influence policy. But more importantly, I think their success means that other parties have to respond to them, have to respond to their initiatives, to their rhetoric, and AfD and BSW have little interest in stability and order. They thrive on instability.
And Chancellor Scholz has called the results bitter, urging the other parties to keep the hard right from power, which would force them into ideologically garbled coalitions. Can this be a successful way forward?
It seems to be that this is the way forward, regardless of whether German policymakers like it or not. The political spectrum is becoming more fragmented. The far right, the far left are political forces to be recognized. And that means that the centrist political parties, those with a strong democratic commitment, have to find new ways to cooperate effectively, not only to advance important policy issues, but also to signal to voters that democratic governance can deliver results.
At this point, it's hard to see how Scholz can politically survive federal elections a year from now, even if he has proven time and again that he has political stamina and cannot be underestimated. Your thoughts?
The questions that are circulating in Berlin certainly are around his political survival. He shouldn't be counted out at this time. But there are certainly questions that are coming up. The SPD, Olaf Scholz's own party, is trying to keep quiet at this time because there's another state election in Brandenburg in 2.5 weeks. But afterwards, if the results for the SPD are as disastrous as in Saxony and Thuringe, I'm having a hard time believing that Olaf Scholz is still as comfortable in his leadership seat as he is now.
All right. Rafael Loss, Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks for coming on the show today.
My pleasure.
This week, one country rarely in the news made headlines. Mongolia, for not arresting Vladimir Putin. Putin's visit to the East Asian neighbor was the first trip to a member state of the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Nearly 18 months ago, the ICC issued an arrest warrant against Putin for alleged war crimes in connection with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Members of the court are treaty-bound to detain suspects, something Mongolia chose not to do, as you can see here. Instead, Putin was greeted in the capital Ulaanbaatar by an honor guard dressed in uniforms styled on those of 13th century ruler Genghis Khan. Ukraine and the EU have called on Mongolia to fulfill its obligations and place Putin under arrest without success. Will other IEC members act differently? Will Putin have the guts to find out? Well, we'll keep you posted. That's it for this edition. I'm Stefan Grobe. Thank you for watching. Have an excellent week.